Hey guys, how you all doing? And ting and ting and ting. And we back with another one. Back with another one. And this one is called Ireland Basic Politics. Now, keep in mind, this video was done in 2017. All I want is a basic understanding of Irish politics, history, politics, culture, you name it. Man is in for it. Let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what this video will teach me about basic Irish politics, which probably is not that much different today than 2017. Let's go.
Ireland is a two-parliament democracy with an upper house, the Seanad, and the lower house, the Dáil. The members of the Seanad are appointed by the Taoiseach, universities, city councils, and a range of other institutions. However, they hold very little power. The real power in Ireland is held by the elected lower house, where the Taoiseach or Prime Minister sits. Their elections take place every 4 to 5 years, but there are also elections every 7 years to elect the president, a largely ceremonial role in Irish politics. All Irish elections use single transferable vote, where citizens rank their chosen candidate.
Okay, now that's starting to sound like Grenadian. I don't think we have two different houses though, but we used to have a premier and a governor general. But now we have a prime minister, and I still think he's called a governor general. I'm not sure, but he's the crown's representative on the island, since we just have independence and we're not a republic as of yet. So a little bit of similarities there, except for the two different houses. We just have a parliament.
And the Irish constituencies have 3 to 5 seats available, so the parties often run more than one candidate to try and win more seats. But this system allows smaller parties to win seats, meaning it's now nearly impossible to gain an outright majority, so coalitions are often formed. Two parties have dominated Irish politics since their independence in 1921, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Decades ago, Fianna Fáil was the more left-leaning of the two groups, but over time they both have become centre-right parties with very little ideological differences. But there are still two somewhat large left-wing groups in Ireland today. Labour, which has recently been in government alongside Fine Gael, and Sinn Féin, which has been led by Gerry Adams since its creation in the 1970s. Sinn Féin has campaigned for the unification of Ireland and is also active in Northern Irish politics as well. And for a while it was the political arm of the IRA. However, it's not necessarily related to the historical Sinn Féin party. Otherwise, there are also much smaller left-leaning groups like Anti-Austerity Alliance, People Before Profits, Workers' Party, and the Greens. And although these receive far fewer votes, they often form coalitions with larger parties to help form a government.
I like that idea, where these little parties could, come in there and actually win seats. And not only win seats, form coalitions with the other parties to benefit the interests of the people. So that somewhere in there, the people is probably going to get some kind of representation. Whereas here, it's just a two-party vibe, it's just like Republicans, Democrats, boom. And of course, Greens in the Palm is going on, so then most of us ain't getting represented. You know what I mean? The election roll around and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to fix this, and then they go in there and they forget we exist because, you understand? Now, correct me if I'm wrong if that's going on there in Ireland, you know what I mean? Because, human beings will be human beings. They, that's just the way it is. But let's keep going here. This is going to be quite interesting here.
Ireland gained its independence from Britain in 1921 after the Irish War of Independence. However, Sinn Féin, the party which largely led the Irish during the war, soon split up over the division of Ireland. This is because the treaty which ended the war kept Northern Ireland under British rule and the independent Irish Free State was still a dominion of Britain. So the pro- and anti-treaty factions fought one another in a civil war in 1922. The pro-treaty faction under the likes of Michael Collins won and W.T. Cosgrave held power for around a decade. But the anti-treaty faction under Eamon de Valera formed the Fianna Fáil party and they eventually took over in 1932. He launched a trade war against Britain, maintained neutrality during World War II, and drafted a new constitution which helped end their dominion status within the British Empire. However, he faced opposition from the Blue Shirts, the fascist organisation which at one point planned to march on Dublin and seize power. But this failed and the fascists formed an alliance with the pro-treaty party to form the Fine Gael party. Plus, many other parties began to turn against De Valera after a gradual economic downturn. So in 1948, left-wing and right-wing parties united to remove him from office. John A. Costello became Taoiseach and brought Ireland out of the British Commonwealth, but the religious and anti-socialists opposed his attempts to give free healthcare to mothers and their children. So his cabinet collapsed and Fianna Fáil was able to form a coalition with some independents and take power again in 1951. But in 1954, thanks to Ireland's continuing declining economy, another coalition allowed Costello to return to power. But this coalition could do little to change the economy, and in the mid-50s the IRA re-emerged and launched attacks in Northern Ireland. So De Valera was voted back in 1957 and Fianna Fáil held power until the 70s. His successor, Sean Lemass, helped modernise industry and reform Ireland's previously protectionist economy. And after the IRA's border campaign failed, he began to mend relations with Britain. Then his successor, Jack Lynch, brought Ireland into the European Economic Community and carried on introducing welfare reforms. But the troubles in Northern Ireland flared up during his first term in office, and his cabinet was brought down in the 1973 election thanks to the arms crisis. This arms crisis was a political scandal that accused ministers, including future leader Charles Haughey, of sending arms to the IRA in Northern Ireland. So Liam Cosgrave of Fine Gael formed a coalition with Labour and took power. However, the world oil crisis damaged the economy and the troubles in Northern Ireland became worse and spilled over into the Republic of Ireland. Plus, his attempts to forge close relations with Northern Ireland and Britain broke down when Protestant Unionists in Northern Ireland went on strike over the Sunnydale Agreement, which was set to allow British and Irish to control different aspects of Northern Irish politics. So Jack Lynch was brought back into office, but another oil crisis further worsened the economy and Ireland had a deficit of over 17%. So with a worsening economy and IRA attacks in the Republic of Ireland, he resigned in 1979. In the 1980s, power was largely split between Fianna Fáil's new leader Charles Haughey and Garret FitzGerald's from Fine Gael. During the election of 1981, many Republicans voted for the new anti-H bloc, a party set up in response to hunger strikes in Northern Irish prisons. This meant Haughey lost seats, allowing FitzGerald to form a coalition government to take power. But his proposed budget was defeated in Parliament, the coalition quickly collapsed, and Haughey won the election of February 1982. However, there was a huge scandal known as Gubu, which saw a murderer found hiding in the home of the Attorney General. Plus, Haughey's proposed cuts meant he lost the support of the left-wing groups within his coalition, so another election was called for in November 1982. Fine Gael saw a huge surge in popularity and formed a new coalition with Labour. Garret FitzGerald was able to work alongside the British in regards to Northern Ireland, and with the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, Irish civil servants were allowed to work in Belfast. However, further budget proposals were rejected by the Labour Party in 1987, and the coalition again collapsed. So power switched hands again after Haughey won the election of 1987 and formed a coalition with the newly created Progressive Democrat Party. This party was created by Fianna Fáil members who began to campaign for both liberal economic and cultural reforms. Plus, after years of economic decline and stagnation, Fine Gael agreed not to oppose any of the government's economic reforms. And Haughey was able to win another election in 1989 and radically changed Ireland's economy by making huge cuts in the public sector and by creating the International Financial Service Centre in Dublin. However, his opinion rating decreased as scandals over his finances and phone tapping emerged, so he resigned in 1992.
Oh, man.
Albert Reynolds succeeded him as leader and, despite losing many seats, managed to form a coalition with Labour. And under him, Ireland's economy continued to grow, but his term in office was marred with controversy. For instance, some ministers were accused of giving subsidies to Larry Goodman, a businessman who exported beef to Iraq before the First Gulf War.
Man, it's just like a controversy after controversy, parties collapsing, not parties, but, coalitions collapsing, and there's just so much going on there, but, can you imagine the people living under this, you know what I mean? And it seems to be like short spaces of time, 2-3 years span, boom, a coalition falls apart. It's crazy, ain't it?
Thus, he proposed Attorney General Willie Hinn became President of the High Court, but reports surfaced that Willie Hinn was refusing to persecute child-abusing priests. So Fianna Fáil lost a couple seats in by-elections, and in 1994 John Bruton from Fine Gael managed to form a coalition with Labour and the Democratic Left, a group that split from the Workers' Party. Plus, John Bruder became Taoiseach just as Ireland's economy improved a great deal. This was a result of many things, including industrial subsidies and low corporate taxes, which encouraged foreign businesses to invest in Ireland and increased trade with the EU. The Irish economy was then dubbed the Celtic Tiger because its debt plummeted, the economy expanded by about 10% each year in the late 90s, and unemployment fell from about 18 to 4%.
Wow.
Plus, divorce was made legal after a referendum, but like many Irish leaders, he too faced a number of political scandals and allegations.
What?
So in the 1997 election, his Rainbow Coalition went up against Fianna Fáil and the Progressive Democrats, but lost. Plus, during the 97 elections, Sinn Féin, led by Gerry Adams, won their first seat in Parliament since the 50s. Fianna Fáil's Bertie Ahern became Taoiseach, and initially the economy continued to grow. Ahern also worked alongside the British in setting up the Good Friday Agreement, which ended the troubles in Northern Ireland, so he was easily re-elected. But his second term in office proved to be more controversial. For instance, he failed to get the Irish to vote in favour of the EU's Treaty of Nice, allowed US military planes to refuel in Irish airports, and the economy stagnated. Nevertheless, he still won a third election in 2007 after entering into a coalition with the Greens. But allegations of cash gifts and loans given to businessmen forced him to resign a year later. Brian Cohen succeeded him just as the banking crisis of 2008 devastated the Irish economy. Cohen's sweeping cuts angered the population and didn't improve the economy. So in 2010, he had to formally ask the EU and IMF for money before resigning in 2011. Michael Martin led Fianna Fáil during the election of 2011, but they and the Greens suffered heavily because of their handling over the recession. In fact, for the first time, both Labour and Fine Gael received more seats than them, and Sinn Féin took 14 seats for themselves. Edna Kenny of Fine Gael entered into a coalition with Labour and became Taoiseach. He introduced property taxes, improved the export sector, and made cuts in the public sector, all of which has helped Ireland's economy bounce back. But this too has angered the population, meaning all of the old parties have lost a considerable amount of support in recent years.
2017.
Although Ireland's economy was poor just a few years ago, it is now the fastest growing economy in the EU. This is thanks in part to healthy import and exports. They import just over $700 billion worth of goods, mainly things like oil, cars and machinery, but they make twice as much money through exporting things like medication and chemical products. But there are still many problems facing Ireland today, one of which is emigration. In the 19th century, Ireland had a population of over 8 million, but thanks to famines and a poor economy, the population declined to a low of 3 million. This has climbed up to around 4.6 million, however many people continue to emigrate. For instance, in 2012 they had the highest net emigration in Europe. But this trend has changed in the last couple of years, and Ireland has one of the fastest growing populations in Europe, and many expect the population will continue to steadily grow. Yet, as many young people emigrate and the elderly return, Ireland has to cope with an increasingly elderly population. And some expect the old to outnumber the young in just a couple of decades, and say Ireland doesn't have a plan or the resources to deal with this. For instance, despite the growing population, the number of houses being built has dropped significantly, especially in Dublin. This has led to a housing crisis which has made homes unaffordable and left many people homeless. Otherwise, Ireland is pretty homogeneous and overwhelmingly Catholic. And although the church's influence has largely diminished, abortion is still illegal, and the two major parties have remained somewhat silent on this issue. However, the Labour Party and many left-wing parties are looking to call for a referendum on this. In terms of party strongholds, Sinn Féin has strong support along the borders of Northern Ireland, but elsewhere, especially after the fall of Fianna Fáil, there doesn't seem to be any strong divides. So the main divide in the country seems to be along urban and rural lines. This is apparent if you look at the results of their many referendums, which are required if the constitution is to be amended. For instance, the results of the 2008 referendum to ratify the EU's Lisbon Treaty shows that people in the countryside are more Eurosceptic. And in 2015 you can see that the urban population strongly favoured legalising gay marriage. However, in most referendums, the majority of regions don't vote overwhelmingly in favour of one side.
You know, it's amazing how a lot of the hotbed issues here sort of mirrors around the world, like abortion, you know what I mean, and things like that. You know, we so much alike as far as certain things is concerned. Political things, cultural things, religious things, we're so much alike. But we want to think that we're so different. Just because we call it something different And and that's culturally speaking and religiously speaking, more so than politically speaking, because I think politics is politics wherever you go, regardless of whatever system you live under. That's my opinion. I've lived under quite a few of them: socialism, communism, colonialism, capitalism. I've lived under all of them in my short lifetime. So you know what I mean. And quite frankly, I don't see much of a difference. I mean, some people might say communism do this, but then you go to a communist country and the communist people say capitalism do this or socialism. Everybody's saying, pointing out each other's miscomings, you know what I mean? But what it all boils down to is a bunch of people who have everything and a bunch of people who have just the minimal. Or a small group of people who have everything and a whole lot of people who have minimal of things. That's what it boils down to from my perspective and from me living certain systems and from me traveling through many systems. It's the same thing, you know what I mean? A bunch of people working day to day trying to make ends meet, while a minority of people trying to tell them how to get to that, or hindering them to get to that because they want to manifest their own legacy for their own children. Let's get back to this here.
Otherwise, since the majority of the major parties seem to be on the decline, Ireland is seeing minor parties claim more and more seats.
Okay.
So unless a new or existing party rises to fill this void, it seems they'll have a number of coalitions for the foreseeable future. Ireland has maintained a policy of neutrality for most of its history and is not part of NATO. So they are free to spend very little money on their military, and it is roughly the same size as Togo's and Albania's. And they only spend 0.6% of their GDP on their military, the lowest in Europe. This means they haven't really had a foreign war, and they've only sent troops on UN peacekeeping missions. Otherwise, Ireland has maintained close relations with the UK and worked alongside them during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And they also maintain close relations with the United States. Outside of Europe, the US is Ireland's chief trading partner, and the American military has been allowed to use Irish airports, and these airports were controversially used by the CIA to transfer prisoners to Guantanamo Bay. Plus, since the late 90s, Ireland has successfully signed a number of trade deals with China and continue to strengthen these economic ties. However, Ireland is largely focused on Europe. They joined the EU in 1973, and while Euroscepticism was on the rise in many European nations, polls indicate that the majority of Irish support the EU. In fact, in some polls, only Luxembourg has a more favourable view of the European Union. But Ireland has challenged the EU before. For instance, Irish voters initially rejected the Lisbon Treaty, but some amendments were made, a second referendum was held, and it was passed. Ireland's pro-European stance doesn't look likely to change anytime soon, because even Sinn Féin, who was somewhat Eurosceptic previously, has changed their stance in recent years. However, since the UK has voted to leave the EU, this could present new challenges in the future. In the 2016 election, every party was required to make at least 30% of their candidates women. The only party who didn't follow this was Direct Democracy Ireland, a very small right-wing party. Otherwise, the chief concern of the 2016 election was the economy. Fine Gael and Labour were able to improve the economy, and unemployment fell to just over 8%. This was thanks in part to increased VAT and sweeping cuts in austerity measures, but one of the most unpopular reforms was to introduce water charges, something that was previously free in Ireland. Labour, for their part in these austerity measures, therefore lost a great deal of support amongst the left wing, and many began to turn to other left-wing groups like Sinn Féin, who were even beating Fianna Fáil in the polls at some points. And Labour's promise for a referendum on abortion didn't win back many supporters, despite their influential role during the referendum on gay marriage. Fine Gael, on the other hand, didn't sway from their centre-right stance and also suffered in the polls. But Fianna Fáil and its leader Michael Martin gained back some support after opposing the water charges. But a number of new parties emerged. For instance, there was Renew, a centre-right party, the left-wing Social Democrats, and the Independent Alliance, a collection of independent candidates with no particular united ideology. And many other new groups were created by dissatisfied members of different parties. For instance, there was Fis Nua, who broke away from the Greens, and Independence for Change attracted many members from Labour and the dissolved United Left. However, some of these new parties like Fis Nua and Renew gained no seats. But the election was pretty disastrous for some of the older parties as well. Both Labour and Fine Gael lost over 20 seats each, and the Greens only managed to gain 2. Fianna Fáil, on the other hand, managed to benefit as they gained over 20, however they still had less seats than Fine Gael. So Sinn Féin, the Social Democrats and Anti-Austerity Alliance People Before Profit all managed to gain seats. Together they took 20% of the available seats, while independent candidates took over 10% of the seats. So both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil entered into negotiations with smaller parties to try and form a coalition. But on the third vote within the government, Enda Kenny was able to be elected after getting support from 9 independents. However, he was only elected with 59 votes, the lowest in Irish history. Plus, although the major parties had previously agreed to confidence in supply, essentially refusing to collapse the governments in power, this agreement is set to expire in the winter of 2018-19. This means such a small government will probably not survive long past this point. However, given the results of past elections and the demise of parties like Fianna Fáil, Labour and the Greens, seats are no longer guaranteed. So it would be increasingly hard to predict the next election. But if Fine Gael continue with their austerity measures, it seems likely that the left-wing parties will continue to grow. Since the election, Fianna Fáil is doing quite well in the polls, but the growing dissatisfaction with major parties may produce far more independent candidates, and it seems coalition will dominate Irish politics for years to come.
Wow. See all them different parties there, you know what I'm saying? That's pretty cool, I think. You know, and I hope you guys found this interesting. And my Irish folks, man, comment down below, tell me what you all know there. Because this, like I said, is 2017. What's it like now? You understand what I'm saying? What's going on over there? You don't hear much about Irish politics from here. All you hear is about the troubles and, you know, oh, they bombing this and they bombing that. And I think a lot of people still have that mentality of Irish people or the Irish country in their heads when they think of that, when they think of Ireland, because even when I have a conversation here, that's the first thing that people bring up about Ireland. I'll leave a link to this in the description to this video. Yo, go check it out. Drop a like on the video for me, and please comment. Please comment the thing. Understand what I'm gonna say? You all take care of each other, alright? Cool runnings.